And to so many people who have been following this trial, on the fourth day, so many people started suspecting that the courts was actually showing signs of acting in favor of the state. Because among all the objections, they were all ruled in favor of the state. Hello everyone, welcome to the Concern Podcast, where we unpack political, socio-economic and cultural stories shaping our world. I'm Emmanuel Taban, and on this video I want us to look at the next step or the next phase of the trial of the first Vice President of the Republic of South Sudan, His Excellency Dr. Riek Machar, Minister of Petroleum Pok Kang Chol, and all their colleagues. Now, one would say it's a new month, a new session for the courts, and a completely different or a new phase for the trial. Now, the courts were adjourned the previous sitting for Wednesday, the 1st of October, 2025. And the reason simply why the courts were adjourned on the 29th of September is simply because the prosecution team gave a request to the courts for the courts to be adjourned simply because they were not in possession of all the evidence to be presented for the courts. The prosecution team claimed that their evidence were in custody of the public prosecution or the Ministry of the Justice, and therefore they didn't know that the courts were going to be, or the courts was going to give a ruling that would give ahead the prosecution process to continue, and therefore they did not come along with their evidences, and they asked for the courts to be adjourned. And yes, for that reason, the courts were adjourned for Wednesday the 1st, which is today, October 2025. Now, I just want to give you a little summary of all the sessions, the previous sessions for the trial. On the first session, the courts convened at Freedom Hall, and both parties were given a chance to provide their preliminary objections. And from the defense team, one of their first objection was about the jurisdiction of the courts. They claimed the courts has no authority to preside over Machar's case. They also gave an objection about the presence of a public attorney or public advocate in presence of the state, of the prosecution team, and they asked that that advocate be sent out because he's not supposed to be among the legal team of the prosecutors or the state, because the law does not provide that or does not allow that. And that was an objection from the defense team on the first day. On the second day, they went for it, and the courts were adjourned on the first day because the prosecution team didn't have a written reply to the claims of the defense team, and for that reason the courts were adjourned on the first day. For the second day, they came on the second day for the session, and the prosecutors submitted their written reply to the courts, and the courts also adjourned the sitting on the second day because they wanted to have like a very lengthy time to look at those claims and compare them against the law so they can come up with a very clear and relevant verdict or ruling about it. And the courts adjourned the sitting on the second day for a third session. On the third session, there were claims from the prosecution side that some two members from the defense team were not having a proper licensing, and therefore they should be sent out of the courts. That was from the defense, from the prosecutors. There was an advocate in the names of Warnyang Kir Warnyang and another one by the names of Deng. The prosecutor says these two advocates didn't have license to actually participate, to be advocates in the courts, and for that reason they asked for them to be sent out. And also, on that very day, the courts adjourned the sitting, asking that they also need time to go and compare those claims with the laws and provide a very good verdict, but also they need to give time to the legal teams to have an ample time for preparations, and for that reason the courts were adjourned for the fourth session, which happened on the 29th of September. That was on a Monday. And on Monday, when the courts reconvened at Freedom Hall, the major thing that people were expecting was that the courts provide a ruling on all those preliminary objections. They expect that the courts provide a ruling on whether it has the jurisdiction to preside over Machar's case. They were waiting for a ruling from the courts of whether the presence of a of a private advocate in presence of the state would be allowed or not, but also to provide a ruling on whether the presence of unlicensed advocates in the names of Warnyang Kir Warnyang and Deng, who were part of the defense team, is acceptable, and also to look at other ways on which maybe the courts will continue with the session that very day. And on the fourth day, that was on the 29th, of course, when the courts reconvened at Freedom Hall after 2 days, the courts started the session immediately by providing their ruling on those pending issues, on those preliminary objections. And according to the verdict or the ruling provided by the court, is that the court says it holds the jurisdiction to preside over Machar's case. Secondly, the courts provided a ruling that the presence of the private advocate who was part of the prosecution team is not illegal. The law provides that the Ministry of Justice has the right to to engage a public advocate to preside over or to participate in its issues or in its cases. And they ruled that the presence of Ajo or Isa, who was part of the prosecution team, is actually not illegal, and Ajo was given a go-ahead to be part of the prosecution team. The court also provided a ruling that the presence of unlicensed advocates in the name of Warnyang Kir Warnyang and Deng is against the law. The law or the Advocate Acts indicates that if any member is not licensed properly, then he should not be practicing. And therefore, the court ruled that the presence of these two was unacceptable, and they were sent out of the courts that very day. They were sent out of the courts, and they were asked to go and actually get a permission from the Chief Justice if they can come back, because they claimed that the issues to do with licensing was mainly rejected by the Bar Association, but they had the intention it was a planting. So the courts provided that these two guys go and get permission from the Chief Justice. So these were the rulings that were provided by the courts on the fourth session. And to so many people who have been following this trial, on the fourth day, so many people started suspecting that the courts was actually showing signs of acting in favor of the state, because among all the objections, they were all ruled in favor of the state or in favor of the prosecution team. And I'm not saying that was totally wrong. Maybe it's just the law that dictates that things get done that way. I'm not saying indeed the court was acting in a biased way. Of course, they might have ruled in favor of the prosecution team, but following the law. So if that's what the law permits, then there's nothing to do about it. But so many people are looking at it in a different angle. They were saying that the courts was showing signs of acting in favor of the state because one, the courts ruled that these two unlicensed advocates be sent out of the courts. The courts ruled in favor of the state that the presence of a private advocate is not unlawful, so it should continue. The court also ruled that it has a jurisdiction to preside over Machar's case. These are all in favor of the state. And so many people are looking at that angle. But let's not look at it that way. So the court is going to reconvene again today on Wednesday at Freedom Hall. And this is where the real prosecution process starts. This is where the prosecutors are going to be given a chance to present their evidences, to present their charges that they laid against the accused. They're going to be given an ample time and they're going to deliberate on that. They're going to give all the evidences, all the forensic evidence that they claim, all the WhatsApp voices, everything is going to be presented. So that is what is going to happen on a Wednesday. And I bet you, this is going to be the most intense and emotive phase of this trial. It is going to be the most emotive and intense because it is now going to be a phase where the prosecutors are going to present their evidence and things are going to look real and people are going to be in panic because they know the impact of a verdict that will come saying those accused are guilty. It is going to be a very intense thing. And one thing that I would like it to be done is that I would wish that the security be reinforced at Freedom Hall and people screen properly before entering the premises of the courts. I know the courts has opened the premises for the public for the purpose of transparency, but that is going to pose a very, very big threat as well because the people that are going to access the courts, I mean, we never know what they're going to get into if they're not properly screened, and anything can happen. And also I call upon a very, very reinforced security, especially around the panel of judges and the both teams, the defense and the prosecution. I mean, like, they should be really provided a very adequate security within the premises of Freedom Hall, but also beyond, because I mean, this is an emotive phase. People are going to have lots of emotions about this issue, and therefore it's gonna be intense, a very, very intense session. Thank you so much. This is the Concern Podcast, and I am Emmanuel Taban. And if this is the first time watching a video on our channel, please don't hesitate to subscribe, hit the subscription button, but also hit the notification button so you can get notified of every new video that we upload on this platform. Thank you so much for supporting us always, and I remain Emmanuel Taban.